A reading of the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus asked her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Listen. Listen, God is calling, through the word inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. 4 weeks ago, we began this sermon series titled "Listen, God is Calling" by singing those words as our hymn of the day right after the sermon. Listen. Listen, God is calling, through the word inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. Throughout these weeks, so far, we've heard 3 different call stories, 3 different stories of people who listened to what God was saying to them. First, 4 weeks ago, it was Moses, who was called by God to lead the Israelite people from slavery to freedom. And it was Moses who questioned if he could even do it. Then it was the wail of a tale from the book of Jonah, sent by God to tell the city of Nineveh to repent, to change their ways. And it was Jonah who questioned even doing it. He didn't want to listen to God. He knew that God was merciful and wouldn't destroy the city. Then last week we heard the story of Saul, a persecutor of people in the Jesus movement. His eyes were opened to the harm he was inflicting, and he took on the name Paul and became a cornerstone of our faith. And now today, we hear this story, a story of a woman, an unnamed woman, an unnamed Samaritan woman who came to a well by herself in the middle of the day, who's had 5 husbands and has some conversation of Jesus about water that's kind of confusing. But it's a woman who's a pretty misunderstood character. You know, part of this church job thing involves committee meetings. Now, I think committee meetings get a bad reputation. But hear me out. Committee meetings are the time when the people of God get to do the work of God. And I enjoy them because I get to see the people of God doing the work of God. That's how I view committee meetings. Now, this past Monday, there was a committee meeting, the Outreach Committee, this group of people dedicated to the work of inviting people into this community and people dedicated to making this community as hospitable as possible. And rightly so. But there's one idea that has not been discussed in any outreach committee meeting so far. As I see our outreach committee members looking, what is he going to say? This idea for outreach comes right from our gospel reading today, finding out how many husbands people have had. No one has mentioned this as an outreach technique. We heard Jesus knew how many husbands this woman has had when he says to her, "You have had 5 husbands." I know, it's just not a nice question. And then by the end of this story, after Jesus says this to her, this woman runs back to Samaria, to her city, tells everyone about Jesus, and then they all start making their way to see him. It seems like Jesus calls this woman out for being not so faithful, and she turns around and decides that Jesus is who she wants to hang out with, that being called out is this great thing that has happened to her. If that's not a model for evangelism, I don't know what is, but not really, because that would be a fairly rude thing to do. And I'm glad the outreach committee has never thought of that, because it probably wouldn't work. Listen, God is calling through the word, inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. Nothing about calling someone out on the amount of husbands that they had seems inviting, forgiving, comforting, or joyful. Yet this unnamed Samaritan woman, the outsider that she was to Jesus, since Jews and Samaritans didn't talk to each other, she responds by going back to her city, saying to people the most basic invitation, "Come and see." Something else is going on here besides Jesus shaming her for her amount of husbands, because, let's be honest, that's how this text has been read. And there's a double standard to that, because the Bible lifts up male characters who have had as many as 8 husbands, like the Old Testament hero King David. So with that, welcome to today's lesson on marriage laws of first century Palestine. You see, women, frankly, in the first century, were viewed as property. It's the reason that the 10th commandment says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Women were in this same category. And so a married woman, if she left her husband or was divorced, would not be allowed to get remarried because it would have been seen as taking someone else's property. Now, why does this matter? Because a woman in first century Palestine could not have had 5 husbands because she was fickle. She couldn't get bored with one guy and move to another. She just couldn't. The only way she could have been married 5 times was through death. You see, in first century Palestine, if a husband died, the woman was to marry his brother or next of kin. Imagine how painful that must have been for a widow, not because relationships with in-laws are sometimes complicated, but it would have been a daily reminder of the grief one experiences as a widow when the person that you're married to was related to your last husband. It's a daily confronting that grief. Now multiply that by 5. When Jesus says to this woman, "You are right in saying, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." Jesus isn't shaming her. He's seeing her in her deepest pain. He's recognizing the grief that as a widow she must have been carrying. Listen. Listen, God is calling through the word, inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. The words that Jesus speaks to this unnamed Samaritan woman were inviting words. They were words of forgiveness for any self-blame that she might have had. They were words of comfort, and they were words that brought joy because someone saw her. And they were words that caused her to turn and say to others, "Come and see." Now you might say, well, Vicar Zach, you just got stuck with the difficult text in this sermon series, and so this is just how you're making sense of this woman. Now, sure, this text isn't an easy one to deal with, but I have three things to offer. First, that when Jesus was talking to this unnamed Samaritan woman, when he tells her that it's a gift to be called by God, she doesn't get it at first either. What a model she is for us to take a moment and pause and reflect on what Jesus is saying to us. Second, our brothers and sisters in the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, know that this woman is a model for us because they've given her a name, Fotini, which means the one who saw light. And this Wednesday, when we celebrate Ash Wednesday, is their feast day of Fotini. They thought she was such a model that they gave her a day. And third, what we can learn from our siblings in the Orthodox Church, I offer a question for us. Why is it that when offered a choice between a God who judges and excludes versus a God who loves the whole world, we so often choose a judging God? It doesn't help things that in this Gospel of John we hear that God so loved the world. God so loved the world, the whole world. And Jesus shows that it might even look like a Samaritan, those people over there. Jesus and this woman offer us an opportunity to see that we can overcome those divisions. They meet at a well in a city named Sychar, and we hear that this well was near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph, that the well is called Jacob's well. And it's significant because Jacob's well, over and over in the Old Testament, was a place where weddings were held. Old Testament figures like Jacob and Rachel, Moses and Zipporah, Isaac and Rebekah, they all got married right where Jesus meets this Samaritan woman. And right there, when that happens, it's another moment of people coming together, not as Jesus and a Samaritan woman, but a Jewish people and a Samaritan people coming together at a place where weddings are celebrated. Listen, God is calling through the word, inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. The first verse of that hymn that we sang 4 weeks ago has this to say: Jesus gave his mandate, share the good news that he came to save us and set us free. The story of the Samaritan woman is not a call story just for her. It's for us too. It sets us free from the ways that we so often prevent God from working. It sets us free when Jesus sees that the way things are is not the way that things have to be. That women who were seen as property in his day could be seen as people. It shows us that to be people of living water, as found in the gift of baptism, each and every time we come to the font, is to be a people that walk as children of the light, to be people that follow Jesus, to be people that see the brightness of God, to be people of living water, is to be people that say no to the ways that draw us from God, and allow those living waters to flow where God might have them flow. Listen. Listen, God is calling. Through the word, inviting, offering forgiveness, comfort, and joy. We heard about Moses. We heard about Jonah. We heard about Paul. And today we hear about this Samaritan woman. What about you? Listen. How is God calling you? Amen.